Greetings to all the participants who are present on this digital platform from all the corners of the globe. I, Dr. Malavika Bhattacharjee, on behalf of the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Vivekananda College, Thakurpukur, welcome you all to this international webinar on leveraging platforms, plots and posters, breakthrough in communication for social change. I welcome our respected chairperson, the very revered Professor Shomindranath Bera, and our special keynote speaker for today, respected Professor Arvind Singhal, to this digital platform of our college. At the outset, I'd like to invite Akash Shah, Head, Journalism and Mass Communication, and the convener of this international webinar, to give his welcome address. It's over
Thank
to
you,
you,
Doctor.
Akash.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharjee. Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, you're audible, you're loud and clear, you're audible.
Before we move on to the main technical session, it is our privilege and honor to have with us Professor Arvind Singhal, sir, speaker, and someone who has an immense impact on the discipline of mass communication and communication studies. As most of us here will agree to it, that as a student of mass communication, we all have gone through the theories of diffusion of innovation. His books on India's communication revolution, from Bullock's Cart to Cyber, and some of his books like India's Information Revolution and many others that have not only given us knowledge about development communication, but has also strengthened our understanding about communication studies and the development aspects to it. Further, it is a great privilege of mine to have with us Professor Somendranath Pera, my teacher and guide, who himself is a specialist in his domain and his lectures as a professor to most of us present here has shaped our thought processes in the subject of journalism and mass communication. It is indeed a greater privilege for all of us from India to welcome all the participants, national and international, who are eagerly waiting to hear the valuable address of both of our honorable guests at this digital platform. Over to you, Dr. Bhattacharjee.
Thank you, Akash,
Thank
for welcoming, giving your welcome address. Due to a very vital administrative engagement that has come up suddenly, our respected principal, Dr. Tapun Kumar Podnar, cannot join us right now on this digital platform. So we have our RQAC coordinator, Dr. Arvind Pan, who will give us inaugural
you.
speech on behalf of Dr. Tapun Kumar Podnar, our principal. Arvinda, are you there? Yes, he is there. Your mic is not mute. Unmute your mic, Arvinda, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, right now, am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. It's a great honor for me to inaugurate this international webinar, which is organized by the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication. I welcome Professor Arvind Singhal, whose first name is coincidentally the same as mine. I also welcome Professor Somendranath Bera, who is the professor of Calcutta University, Journalism and Mass Communication. And it has been our practice in the college to present our students and all the stakeholders, including the teachers, to the frontiers of the individual subject. And that's all we try to do always. And I hope this particular international webinar is again going to be a stepping stone in our pursuit for getting betterment for the stakeholders. With all those few words, let me again welcome our resource person. I hope this particular international webinar will be a great success. Thank you. Over to Malavika and Akash.
Thank you, Arvinda. Dr. Bhattacharjee, you are you can unmute. Yeah.
Thank you, Arvinda, for your encouraging words. So, with your positive note, we start today we move on to our main technical session. It is a request Please do not present. Okay, so we move on to our technical session. Our session for the today will be chaired by respected Professor Shomundranath Bera. So I just briefly introduced him before. Professor Bera has been the faculty of Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Calcutta University for more than 2 decades. He specializes in media ethics and laws, media freedom, and international communication. He has been the former director, Center for Studies in Book Publishing, Calcutta University. Professor Bera is also the life member, Asiatic Society, Kolkata. He wrote a number of books and articles and edited journals, including the Global Media Journal, Indian edition, sponsored by the University of Calcutta. Thank you, respected sir, for giving your kind consent for chairing this session. Now, we move on to our main keynote speaker, and I'll introduce him very briefly because words are not enough to actually describe him. So, Professor Arvind Singhal is a doyen in his field. Professor Singhal is the Samuel Shirley and the Edna Holt Marston Endowed Professor of Communication and Director of the Social Justice Initiative at the University of Texas at El Paso. He is also appointed as the William J. Clinton Distinguished Fellow at the Clinton School of Public Service, University of Little Rock. He is Distinguished Visiting Professor, Inland School of Business and Social Sciences, Norway, and he is also the Chancellor's Honorary Professor, Amity University, India. He teaches and conducts research and has made significant contributions to the understanding of diffusion of innovations, the positive deviance approach, organizing for social change, the entertainment education strategy, and liberating interactional structures. Professor Singhal is co-author or editor of 14 books. 3 of Professor Singhal's books won awards for distinguished applied scholarships. In addition, he has authored 180 peer-reviewed essays in outlets such as the Journal of Communication, Communication Theory, Communication Monograph, Health Communication, Management Communication, Communication Quarterly, and Journal of Health Communication. So with due permission of Professor Singhal and with the due permission of the chair, our chairperson, we would now move on to the keynote address of our keynote speaker today.
Okay, well, thank you, Malavika. Thank you, Akash. Thank you, Arvinda. Also, thank you, Professor Bera. I have to tell you that this is a special occasion for me as I welcome each of the other participants who are on the call today. Many of them are people whom I've known. Many of them are my teachers or at least co-learners. And when Akash got in touch with me and said he would like for me to do a talk, I think I immediately said yes. And the reason was, there are many reasons, but of course it's a great honor, but the primary reason was that I have very fond memories of my childhood in West Bengal. So some of you know this, maybe some of you don't, but I spent the first 6 years of my life in Kharagpur, West Bengal. I was a very frequent visitor because my father worked for the Southeastern Railway as a construction engineer to Calcutta. I remember arriving at the Howrah station, going over the Howrah Bridge to the other side of Calcutta. The 6 years that I spent in Kharagpur, I think my father was the main construction engineer for the Midnapur marshalling yard, which at that time I know was the biggest marshalling yard for Indian railways. And I've been honored and privileged to visit Calcutta many times since then. I visited with my friend Harsh, who's on this call, stayed with him in his beautiful house at Baliganj Park. And during the last visit, Harsh asked me where I would like to go. And I said, well, I have to go to Belur Math. I haven't been to Belur, the place where Swami Vivekananda, after whom your college is named, he basically established the Belur Math right across the Hooghly River from the Kali temple in Dakshineshwar, where Ramakrishna Paramhans and so on. So all this to say that when Akash called me and said, will you join us for this webinar? I mean, the answer had to be a yes. So it's a sort of a homecoming for me. Some people along the way ask me if I can speak Bangla, and I basically say, ektu, bujhte pari, bolte pari na. In any event. So I'm going to share with you 3 stories. I like to tell stories. People who know me, and sometimes people wonder how come he's an academic and he tells stories. I do think from a communicative perspective, stories speak to each one of us in ways that maybe bullet points on a PowerPoint do not. And so I have to apologize. I don't have too many bullet points on my PowerPoint. I do have some images, and I'd like to tell stories. And I'd like to tell you 3 stories. Now, the title of this presentation, there's a sort of a P alliteration. So it's platforms, pots, and posters. And we all sort of know what they are. And through these 3 stories that are based in 3 different countries on 3 different continents, and these are stories that I've been involved in either documenting or actually being a part of. These are stories that I know fairly well. And I'd like to share them with you, especially, our students and co-teachers and co-learners, because I do think that they represent breakthroughs, conceptual breakthroughs, which have tremendous implications for practice. And how you will be able to adapt these stories to your own work, only you will know. And why they constitute breakthroughs, I invite you to think about why they constitute breakthroughs. I will tell the story, you see how they speak to you. Is that a fair invitation? Okay, so I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint. And why don't I see? I think I do see it here now. Okay, share. Tell me if you can see my PowerPoint.
Yes, sir, it's presenting.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Now let's go here and put it on full screen. Can you give me feedback and tell me if you see the screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So platforms, pots, and posters, breakthroughs in communication for social change. And I'd like you to focus a little bit on these 3 images. The first image is about a platform, a digital platform. And I'll tell you the story of an organization called Karma, Karma Primary Healthcare or Karma Healthcare, that's headquartered in Rajasthan. I've been associated with Karma in the capacity of, you can say, an informal advisor, even though they formalized this connection for the past 6 or 7 years since Karma started. It's a fascinating story. And I think all of us here who know this story are enthusiastic about it for reasons that communication for social change scholars should really be excited about. The second story is a story that I've often shared. It's a story from South Africa, and you see the pots, and I'll tell you why those pots are important. And the third story that you see on the extreme right, which we title Posters, comes from Colombia. And it's a beautiful example. It's a UNICEF project. So my friend Guy, who's on this call, would especially enjoy this story. He probably can tell this better than me. But what happened in Colombia in the late 1980s, I think has tremendous implications for the way we look at citizen participation, the way we look at holding public officials responsible, and so on. So anyway, so that's sort of a preview. Platforms. Now, I told you I lived in Kharagpur for 6 years, and I don't know if it is still true, but one of the claims of fame for Kharagpur was that it had the largest platform for trains anywhere in the world. And of course, as a young child, I must have, traversed its entire length, perhaps racing with my two brothers to see who could cover the distance. So that's a physical platform. But what are platforms? Platforms are nothing but, you can call them launch pads. They are an enabling service or an enabling physical entity that allows you to get on board and be transported, be connected. And here you see an example in this image of people in rural India. This photo is, I believe, from one of the rural remote villages in Rajasthan, with a medical doctor, and this is Dr. Saxena, my dear friend, who is sitting in his Udaipur clinic, probably 50 kilometers away from this rural site, and who is providing a high quality consultation to a rural woman, in this case, assisted by a nurse. So on the left, you see a nurse who welcomes this rural woman who is seeking medical care. And the nurse, of course, asks her a few questions. She's from the local area. She builds rapport. She takes her vital, temperature and blood pressure and her her oxygen saturation, and conveys that to the medical doctor who is sitting in Udaipur. And the doctor then comes on screen. This is a very simple technology, given there are very high rates of mobile penetration now in India. So the device, the platform here is a screen, a tablet, with some speakers. You can see a printer. And of course, there are simple equipment to measure your blood pressure and so on and so forth. And she gets a consult. After the consult, the doctor writes an e-prescription. And that e-prescription comes out through this printer. And the nurse then can direct the patient to a pharmacy, often located in the same area as the clinic, sometimes in the same facility. And this pharmacy, again, part of the Karma healthcare system, stacks the 200 plus basic medications that most doctors need to treat patients. And then the patient collects the medicine. She already has a diagnosis. If there's a future meeting that needs to be scheduled, that is scheduled. And the charge, and this is the remarkable part, that the rural woman or man may pay for this service, along with the medication, averages 200 to 300 rupees. That's it. Qualified doctor consultation at low cost, delivered in an area where there are no doctors. Well, there may be some quacks. And right then and there, you get your medication and you have a follow-up. If you need to be referred to another doctor, then Karma does that also. And it has that infrastructure that it has created. So a digital platform. Now the story is really interesting because Karma was started by, do you see this image? Just tell me if you see Jagdeep on the left. Yeah, my Sikh friend, Jagdeep, he's 34 years old. He went to engineering school in India, then was a technology analyst for Goldman Sachs in New York, came back to India, went to ISB, the Indian School of Business. My paths crossed with him on another project in India, a large-scale project in India dealing with entertainment, education, soap operas. And then Jagdeep basically said, I'm going to go back to my roots. I grew up in Udaipur, so he went back to Udaipur, and he said, all this that I have learned as a technology analyst for Goldman Sachs, all that I've learned about business and finance and technology at the Indian School of Business, and all that my heart speaks with respect to where I need to be, Jagdeep decides to start Karma Healthcare. And, he basically puts up his own capital, borrows money from some of his friends, a lakh here, a lakh there, and Karma basically begins. And it's a remarkable story, I think, in some ways, and I don't know if Jagdeep is on the call or maybe he'll get a chance to view this. I was very fortunate, and this is sort of my own personal journey, reflecting on what Jagdeep did. In 1989, so that's 31 years ago, I had a privilege of meeting Dr. Varghese Kurian, the founder or you can say the initiator and the driver of the white revolution in India, milk revolution. And when I met him in 1989, he told me a story. He said in 1964, so now there's a story within a story, India's Prime Minister at that time, Lal Bahadur Shastri, came to the Anand Milk Producers Union Limited, which, as you know, is Amul, one of our finest brand names, came to Anand district, spent some time with the farmers, and then he basically said, what you have here in terms of a thriving dairy cooperative, is it possible for you to replicate this all across India? And that started, for some of us who know about this story, the National Dairy Development Board in India. And of course, over decades, it found a way to empower tens of millions of dairy farmers in developing an enterprise, getting a fair value for the milk that their cows were producing. And, the Amul story is very well known. But what Dr. Kurian was saying is Amul in district Anand of India had figured out a way to serve the needs of the poorest of the poor, the rural and the marginalized, and by bringing them together in a dairy cooperative, providing their animals with fodder and with immunization and with other kinds of services, breeding services, you can improve not just the quality of the cow, not just the quality of the milk, but the quality of life of people. So anyway, I'm telling you about Varghese Kurian because here was something that went on scale in India and empowered tens of millions of people. I'm also reminded of another person, and Varghese Kurian's story is not very different from the story of Jagdeep. He went to Michigan State University, got a degree in dairy. He wanted to come back and work for a multinational, but then he was posted in Anand, and of course his life changed. And as his life changed, so along with it changed the lives of tens of millions of poor dairy farmers in India. And I was very involved with the National Dairy Development Board for 6 years as part of the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. I worked very closely with the National Dairy Development Board, and so I know that story very well. I also at that time would take some flights out of Calcutta, this is 1990, to go to Dhaka, where I met another pioneer of what is known as the microcredit revolution. So I'm talking about Professor Muhammad Yunus, Bangladesh, who started the Grameen Bank. And Yunus's story again reminds me of Jagdeep's story, because Yunus got his PhD at Vanderbilt University in development economics, came back to Bangladesh, began teaching at the University of Chittagong, started in one village as a pilot project, the village of Jobra, lending money to poor people. And now, of course, the microcredit revolution has swept not across just Bangladesh, but almost every country in the world. And so I'm talking about these two stalwarts because Jagdeep is not there yet, but in his own way, I think the work that he is doing has tremendous potentiality. And a little bit, let me just very quickly show you some images of what karma does. So, this is the kind of clientele they get. You test their basic parameters, and that is conveyed to a medical doctor. Here you can see, classic, the doctor says, I want to see your tongue, and she does a big ah, and, the doctor has a face-to-face conversation. And this is the basic pharmacy that comes with it. The pharmacy also has diagnostics. So they may have the most common 15 to 20 diagnostics. So if a malaria test needs to be done, it can be done right then and there. If a pregnancy test needs to be done, it can be done right then and there. And moving on. So this is what karma has achieved in the past 5 or 6 years. It has served close to 750,000 patients across 24 e-clinics. So they started with one, and now it's 24 e-clinics across India. They are active in 270 villages. So, that's the sort of catchment area. And not only do they offer consultation with primary care doctors, internists, but they offer specialties, so skin doctors, gynecology, so on and so forth. And of course, it is beginning to employ across these various centers about 75 people. At the village level, there is only one nurse that basically serves as the conduit to the patient. Now, there's too much on this slide. This is actually a karma slide, but it gives us a sense of the impact. Karma obviously has a very good software platform. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but they collect data from their patients. 78% of their patients, basically the reason why they went to the healthcare clinic, that purpose has been served. You can say their problem was addressed, they were cured. A special focus on infants, women, and senior citizens, even though a lot of their patients are between the 18 to 40 age range. And then 93% of their patients use the pharmacies, the partner pharmacies, which are often located in the same premises. And as you can see, about 12% of them are referred to primary and secondary care facilities. Now, karma is filling an important void. Previously, what existed was a patient, if they were unwell, would go to a jhola chap doctor, a quack, somebody who has basically put the title, I am Dr. So-and-so, and who sits there and, they are untrained. And what they typically do, these doctors, is they offer you a cocktail of painkillers, antibiotics, and steroids. And of course, patients, if you get a cocktail or a mocktail of this, you begin to feel better. These doctors also, at the slightest provocation, may put a bottle, or give an injection. Why? Because, they're feeling weak. And so, of course, you put on a glucose drip and you charge the patient, 500 or 600 rupees, even if they don't need it. Or these quacks may have an arrangement with a city doctor and they may say, oh, you need to go to the city doctor. The patient now has to arrange for transport and a couple of their family members. They go to the city doctor where they may get a few blood transfusions, and they would be charged and so on and so forth. So what Karma does is it has begun to provide a high quality alternative in terms of a high quality of service at very low cost, a package of services, and in areas where there exists none. We talked about platforms, and this is the most exciting part, the back end part. Because at the front end, you have, of course, a patient who comes to a clinic that is assisted by a nurse who then connects to a doctor. But at the back end, Karma has developed this platform, this digital platform, which is going to transform healthcare delivery. It is, in fact, it is multi-featured, so you can get an audio and video consult, digital prescriptions, there's a pharmacy, and of course you have the analytics. It has a strong quality assurance system because it has AI, artificial intelligence capabilities, and through a clinical decision support system, it gets better and better when it comes to treatment protocols. So sometimes when a nurse enters the issues, for instance, that a patient has, the system may recognize that, oh, this maybe is a diabetic, or maybe this is an asthmatic. And of course, the system gets better and better. When a nurse dials in, and of course, there are multiple clinics, and there are, of course, multiple doctors who are available, the system automatically selects which doctor is available. And if it is for a certain specialty, then of course it selects, if you need a gynae consult, then of course, the phone rings or the Skype rings at the end of a OBGYN doctor. And of course, it's IoT enabled, it's integrated across platforms, and it is scalable. Once you've developed a system, it becomes scalable. What is even more exciting to me about Karma is that the data that they have, and of course, it's proprietary data, it has issues of privacy. Now you can use that data to predict disease probability. There's a certain influx of new malaria cases in this part of Rajasthan, or COVID. It can create patient-specific risk profiles. It can provide predictive analytics. And of course, this platform can be adapted to serve other such needs as the kind that Karma is serving. So this is the Karma story. And I'd like you to spend a few seconds thinking about why it is a breakthrough. For me, simply, much like working Korean, much like Muhammad Yunus, Jagdeep has found a way to offer a service which doesn't exist, which is high quality service. In India, we need 6 times the number of doctors that we currently have. So there's a tremendous need. And Jagdeep's clinics are located in areas which are at least 20 kilometers away from a qualified doctor. So the choice of where he operates. And of course, this is the kicker. Karma is not a social enterprise. Karma is an impact-driven for-profit enterprise. And in the last 6 or 7 years, they have shown, I think 60% of their clinics have broken even and are making a profit. In the last year, they have grown 7 times in terms of number of consultations. So while there is obviously initial startup costs and they have impact investors, they are showing us that it is possible to provide a high quality service, to provide diagnostics, to provide a pharmacy, provide a referral, a high quality referral, all at a very low cost, but yet at the same time break even. And this is because of scalability. So moving on, are you ready for our discussion of parts? Say yes.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So about 20 years ago, and some of you know I do a little bit of work in narratives for change, the power of storytelling. Because I strongly believe that if you want to understand a culture or a community, you have to listen to their stories. And if you're interested in social change, if you want to change a community or a culture, you have to change the stories. So I'm going to talk about how parts help change a certain story in a certain context. So in this case, the context is South Africa. And I served as an advisor to this project. And this was an organization called Soul City. It still exists. It still does phenomenal work. And Soul City is a multimedia communication for social change intervention. They have a very popular television program called Soul City, which then is retranslated and re-energized in terms of 9 radio soap operas, and then of course they have printed booklets and comic strips, and so it's multimedia. And in 1999, as I said, about 20 years ago, they were tackling the issue of domestic violence as a national health issue. And you can say domestic violence as a national health issue. How is a health issue? And of course, when you have domestic violence, then there are broken bones, and there are black and blue eyes. And sometimes, of course, it's so vicious that the broken bones can lead to death. You're battered so badly. So there's a physical dimension to it, but more insidious than the physical dimension is the emotional and psychological dimension. You can imagine how it affects the emotional and psychological health of not just the individual, the one who's being battered, but also of the family. So at many levels, domestic violence, it deals with physical health, emotional health, psychological health, not just of the individual, but also of the family, of the community. And what is even more insidious is that domestic violence happens in a sphere, the home, which we typically look upon as being a source of security. So when it happens in a place of security, you are quite helpless. So what we discovered when we were doing this work in South Africa, and I prefaced it by saying that if you want to understand a culture, you listen to the stories. There were 3 stories at play. So this is taking very complex formative research and distilling it into 3 scripts that existed. For the abuser, the man, the story was that if I come into my home and I close my door and I shut my windows, or if I, shut the curtains, I am in private space. And in this private space, I am the king, I am the captain, I can do anything I want. The story that they have learned from their parents is only one bull can live in a kraal. So there's only one boss. And so if a woman, your wife or a partner, is not home when you come home and you're hungry and there's no dinner, and maybe she's gone shopping, and when she comes home, you can be the bull. No, you can put her in her place. That is the man's script. That's the man's story. The woman's story, the one who's being battered, the victim, or the abused, is a little different. In the safety of her own home, she is violated and repeatedly violated. She wants to ask for help, but she cannot. Even if she tells her mother, the mother says, Beti, you need to work this out yourself. After all, he's a good provider. So she's helpless, and that's her script. in her own home. And then, of course, there is the third script, and that's the script of the neighbors. Domestic violence is typically loud, and it is very visible, no? And often, if a neighbor sees a woman battered with a blue and black eye and asks her what happened, she will say, "Oh, I fell down," or "I hit my head on the door." So the neighbors exactly know what's happening, but they don't talk about it, because their script is that it is a private matter between husband and wife. So these are three stories that exist, which perpetuates and escalates the cycle of domestic violence. And Soul City was trying to address this issue. So on their television soap opera, which was based on these three scripts, they showed exactly these scripts playing out. You know, a man who's a teacher, he's respected in school, but he has a short temper. His wife, who's a health worker, she's a good wife, but sometimes when, he's upset, he puts her in her place. And, she wants help. Neighbors want to help, but they can't. She asks her mother, the mother says, "You have to make it work." The neighbors are saying, "Well, what do we do? What do we do?" And, they basically end up doing nothing. But then one day the story changes because it's a soap opera. So while you've built up this story of the scripts being stuck, one day when the man is about to beat his wife, the neighbors come out of their homes with their pots and pans. And they stand outside the abuser's door and they begin to bang these pots and pans. Now, this story did not exist in the repertoire of South African society. This was modeled on television. Yeah. So remember, I said, if you want to understand a culture and a community, listen to the stories. If you want to change a culture and a community, change the story. The story has changed because the scriptwriter now has brought in pots and pans, neighbors standing outside the abuser's door and banging them. And we know that pots and pans make a lot of noise. Now, what do the pots and pans do to the man and his story? Is he still in private space where he can be the captain of the ship, or has the private space now become a little more public? The story has changed. What does it do to the woman? So the same pots which are telling the man, "Stop, we see you," are telling the woman, "We are here. We know what you're going through. We are with you." And what does it do to the script of the neighbors who previously felt as being silent colluders because there was not much they can do? Now they have taken an efficacious action. They have come out. And remember, they have not come out alone. They have come out as a collective. And this collective modeling is important. Why? Because if you're trying to address a collective norm, a societal norm, much like domestic violence, and if you're trying to change the story, it is important that the collective model. Now, remarkably, this is also an example when you introduce a new story with pots, and pots are important. Why? Because every home has them. We know about Gandhi's SALT campaign, and why was SALT campaign so effective? Because every person, poor or rich, needs salt. Every home, black or white, has pots. Pots basically are instruments of, you can say, women, because they, in some ways they are her symbols of, you can call it oppression or subjugation. But here, what one has done is one has changed the story. And the tools of her subjugation and oppression, which put her in her place, can they become the tools of her liberation? So the reason why I'm telling you this story is because it is a beautiful example of understanding what the scripts are and finding a way for those scripts to be changed. So did it surprise us when, after this particular episode was broadcast on television, that we began to hear that in many communities of South Africa, people began to come out of their homes with pots and pans to address the issue of domestic violence. We even began to hear that when a man was being, let's say, not so kind to his wife in a bar, the other patrons got up and began to bang their beer bottles. And you may ask the question, where did they learn this from? So the power of stories, the power of symbols, and symbols that can speak to different constituencies in different ways is illustrated by pots. Why is it a breakthrough? Well, you can pause and reflect on this story and think about what are the things that you're trying to change. What are the existing scripts, and how can those scripts be taken to a place where they have not been, in a socially desirable place? Of course, if you are a researcher like I am, it is very important to have these new stories because now you can measure it. Too often, we as program evaluators, we have no way to say, is it really our campaign that is making a difference? But if you introduce a new story, a new behavior like pot banging, you can then track its uptake. So if people now know about pot banging as a way of addressing domestic violence, you know that it was your campaign that made the difference. And since we have the word breakthrough, I don't know, some of you may remember there was a wonderful campaign in India, I think it was about 10 or 12 years ago, by an organization called Breakthrough on domestic violence, and it was called the Bell Bajao campaign. That if you hear something happening in your neighbor's home, you just come and begin to press the bell so that you interrupt in some ways the story of how life normally plays itself out. Akash, how is that? Do you think we should move to the third story?
Yes, sir, sure. Yeah, we are excited to know the third one. Yeah, it was indeed very enriching. The question of pot came to everyone's mind, I believe. And so you wonderfully related the story to it.
Okay, good. Let's move on. Posters. Now, at this time in the US, there are elections. And we know that, we just finished the Republican National Convention, and I think my views on a change, we need to change the story, are pretty well known for those of you who know me. So I want to take you to Colombia in 1988 for the first time. And I did a project for UNICEF, I think like 15 years ago. They had asked me to collect breakthroughs of their work in the last 60 years. And this is one of the breakthroughs I identified. In 1988, Colombia had, for the first time ever, a mayor's election. So, mayors are elected for municipalities. Before 1988, mayors were not elected in Colombia. There were over 400 municipalities, and mayors were typically appointed, by the governor of the prefecture or the state or whatever the unit of administration is in Colombia. For the first time ever, and we know all elections and all politics are local, mayors, stood for elections. And you can imagine there were 3 or 4 candidates for each of the municipalities, over 400 municipalities. And they, of course, have to canvass, right? They have to, make the case why they should be elected. My dear friend Sonia Restrepo Estrada, who was a UNICEF official in Colombia, decided that this was the time to bring a platform of issues related to children to this whole political process. And through her brilliance, and the person that you see on this right is Juanita. She created a fictional character, okay? So imagine a 15-second television ad, a television poster, if you may. And then we'll come down to the physical paper poster. She designed a television ad, 15 seconds, in which you see a young schoolgirl. Her name is Juanita, you find that out, maybe 10 years old, with the ribbons and, her hair are braided. She walks into a classroom, pulls out her bag, pulls out a notebook, tears a piece of paper, and she begins to write on that piece of paper, okay? And this happens very quickly. It's a television ad. And what does she write? This is what she writes. On this piece of paper, she writes, "I am Juanita," and she's writing to these candidates who are standing for elections. "You do not know me, but I know you. You are a very important person who is going to be in charge here. We are lacking schools, clean water, food, and health. Our problems are many, but the solutions, there are solutions, and they are easy solutions." And then she ends this letter by saying, "I cannot vote because I'm a child. I cannot give you my support yet, but you can give me yours." And she signs her name as Juanita. So this came on television. And this is the picture of Juanita, a little girl going to a school who cannot vote, but who is asking the person who is standing for elections, "What are you going to do for me?" And this letter from Juanita, which was posted on a television ad, was then turned into a leaflet and sent to the 1,500 or so people who were standing for mayoral elections. The front end of the leaflet was this letter from Juanita with an image of her, a small poster, you can say. At the back, what UNICEF had done, because it has disaggregated data, for that particular municipality, they had provided the figures. Oh, in this particular municipality, these many children are vaccinated, these many are not. In this particular locality, these many girls go to school, these many do not. In this particular municipality, the rates of maternal mortality are, or infant mortality are, etc., etc. In essence, what Juanita was doing is she was telling each mayoral candidate, in this particular municipality that you're standing for elections, these are the problems. I cannot vote because I'm a child. I cannot give you my support yet, but you can give me yours. So the question was, what are you going to do for me? Brilliant. Very low cost, little leaflet-like posters. And then what Sonia and UNICEF did is they printed out big posters of Juanita with the simple caption, "I cannot do much for you. What are you going to do for me?" And they plastered Juanita's posters along with the posters where candidates were canvassing. So here is Juanita challenging these candidates, asking them, "What are you going to do for me?" And UNICEF worked with a whole slate of journalists so that when these candidates were on a platform behind a microphone, the journalists would ask them, "What are you going to do for Juanita?" Right? So children's issues had to become very critical to the platform, the electoral platform of these mayoral candidates. And they all had to come up with a platform. And the interesting thing was that not only Juanita asked them while they were campaigning, "What are you going to do?" but after a year, after they were elected, she would basically send them their report card coming out of UNICEF to hold them accountable. Are you actually doing it? So, very low cost, very high impact, and of course, what is a breakthrough? Why is it a breakthrough? Here is a simple way of showing how you can take the voices of children who often are marginalized, silenced, overlooked, rejected, whose voices are mute, find a way through a simple, let's say, television ad, a television poster, bring their issues to the surface, translate that into a leaflet with local data, translate that into a poster so that you are not just making them accountable for the platform that they are proposing, but also hold them accountable as a report card a year or two later. So this is really, in summary, 3 case studies that I feel have some lessons for us, some breakthrough conceptual lessons. With karma, how do you offer high quality medical care, primary consultations at low cost in a place where there is none? Couple that with diagnostics, couple that with pharmacy, and couple that with referrals. With Soul City, the value of storytelling and telling stories that can take people to places they've not been and untangle these scripts, these normative social scripts that are stuck. POTS as a way of bringing to the open issues which are very insidious in the domestic sphere. And Juanita, making public officials accountable through little posters and leaflets where there is usually no accountability. Thank you. I will end here and I will stop sharing and I'll let you decide how you want to take it forward. I know it's been an hour, so you may decide how we may wish to proceed again. Thank you for listening.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome you all. I'm Professor S.N. Bera from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication of the University of Calcutta. And first, I should congratulate the authorities of Vivekananda College, Thakurpukur, India. It's from India.
Yes, yes.
And the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication of the college, in particular, for arranging such an extraordinary online seminar. It's fascinating. All must admit. And it is involving a speaker who is acknowledged across the globe as one of the stalwarts, truly, in the field of communication and media research. I must say it's definitely a privilege to listen to Professor Arvind Singhal. And I'm sure it's a great learning experience for all of us, truly. And today he spoke on the topic, we all know, leveraging platforms, POTS and posters, breakthroughs in communication for social change. A very value-added title. And the whole study is based on, we all experienced, just on several case studies, 3 case studies in particular. And what I feel for more than 3.5 decades of his academic life, Professor Singhal has been focusing on how the communication process can ignite social transformation to enhance social justice and social change, to better quality of life of the underlying. It's not just this paper, all through. And it's perhaps like a mission to him, what I feel. His research has always been with a purpose, what is reflected in this presentation also. You have to listen to what struck me, this particular sentence, expression. He said, you have to listen to the stories of the people. It is very important to the students of it. Why you have to listen to the stories of the people? To design a communication strategy. Somebody once said, there are 3 sides of every story. I don't know whether he is correct or incorrect. There are many sides and many lessons. So all of us are extremely benefited with your presentation, sir. Thank you, Professor Singhal, for joining us in this international webinar despite your busy schedule. I am sure this seminar will encourage other media schools in Calcutta and Bengal and other parts of India to hold seminar on core areas, such core areas of communication research, studies and research. I see this session has been connected to a global audience. Special thanks to all of you for staying with us. Before concluding my remarks, I would like to thank Dr. Tapan Kumar Poddar, Principal of Vivekananda College, for inviting me to chair the session. Thank you, Akash, Mr. Akash Shaw, Head of the Department of Vivekananda College, Journalism and Mass Communication Department. It was actually his credit to contact and invite Professor Arvind Singhal and to hold such a session, great session. I also thank Dr. Malavika Bhattacharya and Arvind Pan. And with all this, with these few words, I come to thank you all. Thank you, Professor Singh. On behalf from my department also. On behalf of my department, I also thank you, congratulate you, and express our gratitude for joining a college in a program in a college which is affiliated to the university. Namaskar. You understand Bengali? You told me.
একটু একটু বুঝতে পারি। Akash, would you like me to say a few words in closing?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There are some questions, sir.
Yeah, okay, of course.
Can we take few questions?
Yes, of course, anytime.
Okay.
I may not have the answer.
There should be a question answer session. There should be.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I'm here.
Okay, should I take the question, or Akash will take up the question?
Yes, Dr. Bhattacharya, you can take up the questions.
Okay, there is somebody called Shivani Sharaf. She has asked about, is this kind of model scalable? So if Shivani is here, exactly about which model were you talking? Is she available here? Shivani Sharaf. I don't think so. She is there with us. So sir, did you get the question?
I did. So the reason why I call them conceptual breakthroughs is they are conceptual breakthroughs, and how they can be scaled, I won't know. And the power of stories is that you may say, I probably cannot do a karma healthcare, but I'm interested in changing the script on child immunization. And how do I take the story to a place where it hasn't been? So concepts and theories, the reason why we value them is because they do have that dimension of generalizability. But of course, they have to be, resonant with the local conditions. A karma as a model is imminently scalable. In fact, the proof of concept is there now. In the last 6 years, they have shown that you can actually deliver a high quality service with diagnostics, with a pharmacy, with referrals, and make a profit. And the software platform that they have clearly is eminently scalable. In fact, the costs of technology are falling. Their bandwidth is expanding. In India now you have 5G, with Geo and all that. So, and that I think is the promise. The promise of the dairy cooperative societies was that it was scalable. The promise of the microcredit revolution was that it was scalable, but it was based on certain principles. So to that extent, yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have another question from Sri Rajesh Dash. He says, this Professor Singhal nicely architects a story of man and woman. The said story actually tries to explain an approach to health and well-being from inside and outside. Sir, would we consider it a methodological necessity for cultural psychology of health?
Oh, this is my friend Rajesh, I think from West Bengal. I do think that in order to do any kind of intervention which involves cultural norms and health issues, it is highly important to do a cultural archaeology of how people process the world around them. Much like, you go back to the Soul City stories. What we are trying to do is you're trying to understand the archaeology, intergenerational archaeology of the man's mind. You're trying to understand the archaeology of the woman's mind. You're trying to understand the archaeology of the neighbor's mind. And within these competing discourses which are stuck, you find a way to flip the script. What the pots do is they flip the script. The archaeology of, oh, I can do anything I want in my house is now public. For a woman who feels helpless, now, oh, there are people who, so absolutely. I mean, the simple answer is yes. And we don't do a very good job of it, of trying to understand the different layers of how people think. And the more we have a better understanding of it, and this is sort of, doctors think they know everything, or health experts think they know everything. Unless you really understand the scripts, the different sedimental layers, why people think the way that they do, the solution will not emerge. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have another question from Mr. Guy Scandelin.
Guy, my friend, I see him. I'm now really worried. Guy is my guru.
Okay, so Professor Scandelin asks, I'd like to ask about rumors and misinformation. What strategies seem to be best for countering rumors and misinformation? Could you kindly address this issue?
It's a very difficult issue. And it's a very difficult issue because, as Guy knows, that there's something hardwired in our human nature that we love gossip. And anything which is scandalous, oh, who's sleeping with whom? Oh, what did the Chinese government do? Did they, spill this virus out so that, rumors and misinformation are the mother of all challenges because they are very easy to produce. You can play to people's emotional sensibilities, get them all wired up, and of course, the primary mode through which they travel is interpersonal. And I think it was Ogilvy who once said that the reason why the interpersonal is important because it has the word personal in it, right? So if my mother calls me and says, you wouldn't believe what is happening, it's like, oh, what is happening? So Guy, this is a very tough area. Rumors, and now there's no reason why you can't counter it, right? So the counter narrative. But what happens is the counter narrative is usually far more sterile, far less interesting than, so the challenge then is, how does the counter narrative, they're competing discourses, they're competing narratives. How does the counter narrative gain weight? That Guy can come often from influencers, from respected influencers. I know you're based in Thailand. We have, I remember, for instance, during the AIDS epidemic, when of course there are all these rumors and misinformation that, a person who's infected by HIV, they touch you and you get HIV, right? And, that's the stigma and the discrimination, the prejudice, the othering, right? And it is completely based on misinformation. In fact, HIV is not such an easy thing to catch, because it doesn't, you can't breathe. It's unlike COVID, you can't breathe HIV on somebody. So I remember Michai our legendary communicator, Michai Veeravedya, goes on national television because he was the AIDS czar. And of course, he's humorous and funny. He's with HIV-infected children, and he asks for Coca-Cola to be served to these children, and then he takes a sip from each of the glasses. Now, that probably did far more to dispel the rumor and misinformation than anything else. But it is very hard to counteract, and the competing discourses don't have that level. So that's the reason why you need influencers, from the popular culture, whether it's sports people, whether it is, respected people who actually demonstrate that this is not right. But they will still compete. Guy, I hope you give me at least a D grade on this answer, a pass.
So, will I take the next question? This is Archana from Jammu. She's trying to understand whether the karma story can be considered as positive deviance example. Kindly enlighten.
Okay, how nice. So, I do work in the area of positive deviance. So the key with positive deviance is the following: that somebody is doing something that nobody else is doing. So it's a deviant act, and it has better outcomes against all odds. So if you use that framework, then yes, there are lots of e-healthcare initiatives in India. Okay, karma is not the only one. The reason why I'm talking about karma is because it has figured out that the health worker in the village is really important. Karma is a nurse-assisted e-healthcare system. It is the local nurse who speaks the local language in a local shop where you go. So, the user experience of a rural villager is the same as going to a Jhola Chhap doctor, right? You go to a shop where there is a clinic, the nurse welcomes you, and the nurse then, becomes the aid, the conduit to it. So I think there's several elements of the karma story which deviate from the norm. We often think, e-healthcare, just connect a doctor and a patient. But there are, again, so many, look at the cultural archaeology. Would a woman feel comfortable talking to a man doctor? No. That's the reason why karma has many women doctors, for instance, on its panel, and so on. So, you can at some level say, but our expectation and hope is that and there are lots of private investors who are now, I'm not supposed to disclose much, who are very interested in taking the karma software technology, the platform they've developed, because they can use it for so many other things, And, they're providing a healthcare service, but, various other services can be provided. So I do think that the work that they are doing is groundbreaking, in my opinion. And my sense is, if karma continues on the path that they are, in a few years, and if they show, as they have done, proof of concept, breaking even, then whether you have 25 clinics or 2,500, it doesn't matter.
Thank you, sir, again. There's another question from Ruchita Sujay Chaudhary. She's asking, throw light upon the obstacles in storytelling and how to overcome.
Oh, Ruchita, you'll have to repeat that question again. What are the obstacles in storytelling? Is that what?
Yeah, obstacles in storytelling and how to overcome it.
Well, first you've got to have a compelling story to tell. And what does that mean? That basically means that there has to be some insight, that, when it is over, when you get the punchline, it is like, wow, now I'm enlightened, or now I can see things in a way that I didn't see them before, right? You mentally have to be transported. So the way of overcoming obstacles is to get the story right, facts, and then of course to string them narratively in a way that you carry your audience members with you, and then you find a way to bring in the parts because it disrupts the story and creates an insight. So practice, 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 Ruchita. If you have a compelling story to tell, figure out what is compelling about it and practice, practice, practice. And that's the reason my friend Ito-san is on this call. He listens to every story that I tell very carefully, and then he tells it even better. Malavika, I can be here all day, but this is what professors do. Should we take like another 2 or 3 questions?
Okay, so let's. There's one question about Juanita with that. Can we interact the last story of Juanita with development support communication? If it is so, then how is it relatable?
That you will need to
Sir,
figure
did you
out.
get the question? I think so. The connection is disturbing, I guess.
Yeah, no, I got the question, but I think that if it's a concept, people will have to figure out how does Juanita speak? How does that story speak to them? I think that anytime there are elections, public officials need to be made accountable. And they need to be made accountable in ways that Juanita did. Not exactly that way, but in your own context. How can you hold them publicly accountable? It's like, what about me? What are you going to do for me? And you begin asking what they're going to do. And politicians have to respond usually, because if they don't respond, that itself is a response. So it's a way of bringing in civic participation at the local level. Because if you want change, your vote really is your God-given right to cast that ballot of change. So we shouldn't take it too lightly. That's the first fundamental thing you can do to change.
Even those who are not even voters.
Yes, precisely. In this case, children. Yeah, they are an important constituency, right? Yeah, and that's the beauty, I think, of Juanita.
Yeah, that's the beauty.
Sir, should we take any more questions, or should we leave it here, sir?
Do one more if there is any.
One more.
Yeah, there is one interesting one. What should be the role of journalists in this pandemic situation regarding their news?
Only journalists will know. I'm not a journalist, an old professor. Yeah, but maybe there are some. I think I strongly believe in solution journalism. My friend Guy asked a question about rumors and misunderstandings, and so much of journalism is, for right reasons, dealing with violence and earthquakes and fires and this and that and blah, and that's fine. There's always a page 3 and this gossip and that gossip. I strongly believe in solution journalism. And what is solution journalism? It's taking the story to a place where it's not been, or which usually is not covered. Why isn't the karma story more well known? It should be, right? And there are millions of karmas around. And it's too often easy to stay with what everybody is staying with. And I think there's so for instance, the Better India portal is, I think, an excellent service. I get my news feed every day. My morning begins by reading the Better India portal, because there are beautiful stories of little things that are happening in all parts of India which are making a difference. But of course, they always are worried about how do we, you need reporters, you need good journalists, you need good. So these are the initiatives which need to be supported, I think. Or if you're a journalist and if you can use the power of your pen to tell stories which lift people, that has value.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think so. We'll call it end here, Akash. I'd like to, with a permission
Hello. I think there is a connection error. Dr. Bhattacharya.
Akash, we can
You
hear
are,
you.
Yeah.
you are audible, Akash.
Yes. Yes, sir. I think there are some technical glitches. So we can call it an end. And before we do so, we would like to propose, I would like to propose a vote of thanks to our dignitaries and participants present in this webinar. This will be just a formal thing before we end the webinar. So, as today's webinar was an enriching experience, and as all good things come to an end, and so on behalf of the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication of Vivekananda College, Thakurpukur in West Bengal, India, that is affiliated to the University of Calcutta, that happens to be one of the oldest university in the subcontinent. I extend my heartfelt thanks to all the attendees of today's international webinar. And moreover, I would extend my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to the chairperson of the session, Professor Shomendranath Bera, my teacher and guide from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, University of Calcutta, for his remarks on the deliberations made by the keynote speaker. I am very, very grateful and thankful to our keynote speaker, Professor Arvind Singhal, for such an enriching and informative lecture that has enriched us in understanding several aspects of communication for social changes. And these three stories actually, the moment I got the topic, actually the thing which was pondering my head was, what are we relating to, what is pots actually, what are the domestic pots, and how can we relate story to it. So the way sir lucidly related three case study stories and how communication plays a social change or a role of social change was really a wonderful learning experience through this session. We also acknowledge the presence of dignitaries here, our Honorable Principal Sir, for his support and guidance in such academic endeavors. I would like to thank our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Arvind Pan, for his support in such academic discussions and webinar. My esteemed colleagues, both from our college and from the academic fraternity across the world, who have joined us in the webinar today, and most precious of all our research scholars and student participants. I would thank them for such a patient listening and making this program, the session, a great success. Thank you all. Thank you everyone for such a wonderful session.